closely to teachings and reason. Having examined other treatises, we must return now to the right one. Even though this transforming consciousness, the manas, has 3 supports, still, Vasubandhu's verse refers only to the first 2 when it says that it evolves supported by that, because it tries to show that the support and object of this consciousness are the same, because the first 2 supports have the predominant functions, or because the initiating and guiding support is easy to comprehend.
5. The object of manas. Having discussed the support of this consciousness, what is its object? Vasubandhu's verse says, with that as object. That refers to the previous consciousness as support, because the holy teachings say that this consciousness has the store consciousness as its object. One interpretation, by Nanda, is that the object of manas is the substance of that consciousness and its associated dharmas, because a treatise says that manas is always associated with attachment to me and mine, taking as its object the substance of store consciousness, and its associated dharmas, it grasps them as me and mine respectively. Because associated mental activities are not separate from consciousness, there is no contradiction with doctrine. In the same way, the term consciousness only does not contradict the fact that both consciousness and associated dharmas are included in the term. Another interpretation, by Sutras, is that explanation is incorrect, because nowhere in scriptures is it said that manas has as its object such things as contact, sparsa. You must say that manas only takes as its object the seeing, dhargana, and seeing, nimitta, parts of this store consciousness and conceives them respectively as me and mince. Consciousness is the substance of both the perceiving and the perceived, so this explanation does not contradict the holy teaching that says that the object of manas is the store consciousness.
Stharamati says that this explanation, by Sutrabhanu, is also incorrect, because the objects of the 5 material organs are not included in the aggregate of consciousness, because, like the 5 consciousnesses, manas would have external objects as its objects, because, like mental consciousness, 7 anas, would have as its object a common object, rather than a special one, and because those born in the formless realms would not be attached to the notion of mine, because the consciousness of those born there with a disgust for form does not evolve into form.
It should be said, rather, that manas has as its object only the store consciousness and its seeds, and these are grasped respectively as me and mine, since seeds are, in reality, the energies of that consciousness and not really existing things. This explanation does not contradict the holy teaching that the object of manas is the store consciousness. Dharmapala believes that the above explanations are incorrect, because seeds of form, ripabija, etc., are not included in the aggregate of consciousness. Also, the Yogacarabhimi Sastra says that seeds are real, because if they do not exist, they would not act as causal conditions. Also, this 7 anas consciousness is born with the view of a self and freely continues in a series as a single kind, so how do you suppose that it independently grasps a self or of mine? 2 objects, such as eternity and cessation, etc., cannot be grasped separately and simultaneously by a single mind. Nor should it be said that it grasps the 2 successively, because it has functioned with a single character since beginningless time.
You must understand, says Dharmapala, that manas has as an object only the seeing part of the store consciousness, not the others, because from beginningless time it has been a homogeneous series resembling something constant and unitary, and because it is always the support of all dharmas. Manas only grasps that as its own inner self. The reference to mine, in texts, is only a manner of speaking. Or it grasps the store consciousness as its own self, and, therefore, the 2 expressions, me and mine, refer to that single seeing part. This explanation accords well with teaching and reason, because many passages speak only of the view of a self, because grasping a self and grasping a mind do not occur simultaneously.
When manas is still in a non-transmuted stage, it has only the store consciousness as its object, but when the transmutation of the support has occurred, it also has as its objects true suchness and other dharmas. This is because realization of the knowledge of sameness acquires 10 kinds of sameness, and it realizes the differences of resolve among sentient beings and manifests itself in the images of various Buddhas. Here, in Vasubandhu's verse, it only speaks of manas, that is not transmuted, and therefore it says that this has that store consciousness as its object, because it must be the case that awakening and delusion are free and confined, respectively, and objects of absence of self and self are universal and non-universal, respectively. How can this consciousness have as its object its own support? In the same way that a subsequent consciousness takes the prior manas as its object, and since this creates no problem, why is there any problem with manas having the eighth consciousness as both support and object?
6. Nature and character of manas. The verses of Vasubandhu say, it is the nature and character of thinking. These two, i.e., nature and character, refer to the self-nature and mode of activity of this consciousness, because its self-nature is that of thinking, and it uses it as its mode of activity. It gets the special name of manas because it examines and thinks. When one has not yet undergone a transmutation of the support, it always examines and thinks about the characteristics of the self that it grasps, but once transmuted, it examines and thinks about the characteristics of the absence of a self.
7. Dharmas associated with manas. With how many mental activities is manas associated? Vasubandhu's verses say, it is always accompanied by 4 passions. Here, the term accompanied means associated with, that is, from beginningless time up to the time of transmutation, manas freely and perpetually takes the store consciousness as its object and is associated with 4 fundamental passions, i.e., delusion about self, view of self, self-conceit, and self-love.
Delusion about self means ignorance. It is called delusion about self because of ignorance about the character of self and because of delusion about the principle of no self. Verwar self means grasping a self. It is called view of self because one falsely posits a self in dharmas where there are no selves. Say that conceit means haughtiness. It is called self-conceit because the mind is exalted through pride in the self that is grasped. Self-love means craving the self. It is called self-love because one generates a deep attachment to the self that is grasped. Along with it shows that conceit and love accompany views, and love accompanies conceit, which contradicts the opinion of other Buddhists that they are not associated.
These 4 constantly appear to disturb and pollute internal consciousness, causing the other external consciousnesses to be perpetually defiled. As a consequence of this, sentient beings undergo the cycle of birth and death, unable to free themselves, and for this reason they are referred to, literally, as afflictions, klesa. There are, actually, 10 passions, so why are there only 4 listed? Because of the presence of belief in a self, the other views, drst, do not occur, because 2 discernments, prajva, do not exist simultaneously in a single mind.
Why must this, manas, have a view of self? Because the 2 attachments, to opinions and to the belief in the value of mere morality and ritual, and wrong views, mithadadursti, are born of discrimination only, and they end only with insight, darsana, but these innate passions are natural and innate, ending only with cultivation, bhavana. The extreme view of a mine occurs in dependence on the view of a self, but the view associated with this, jhanas, does not occur in dependence on that. It perpetually grasps an inner SCLF and for that reason must have a view of a self. Furthermore, as a result of the firmness of views, doubt cannot occur. Because of the love for and attachment to a self, antagonism cannot occur. Thus there are only 4 passions associated with this consciousness. Why do the 3, view of a self, conceit, and self-love occur together? Because there